You're watching Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. It's a pleasure to be joined from Geneva by Dr. Torek Farhadi. He's an ex-advisor to both Presidents Ghani and Karzai. Dr. Farhadi, welcome to StratNews Global. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on this program with Ambassador Katju.
It's absolutely a pleasure. Ambassador Vivek Katju, thank you also, sir. No introductions needed for you. Just wishing you and Mrs. Katju a happy 40th anniversary as well. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. And I think for me, it's a particular pleasure to be on a program with Torek, whom I consider one of the world's leading experts on Afghanistan, among other things.
Thank you.
Dr. Farhadi, just the latest developments which are being seen as another step, because there's so many steps that have been taken, but it's being seen as a milestone just for the fact that both sides, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and negotiating team and the Taliban, have agreed to written procedures for talks. How significant do you see that?
Well, thank you. I would have liked for Ambassador to start the program.
As a guest, we start with you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored. I have a lot of respect for Ambassador Katju. He was the first ambassador after the fall of the Taliban in Kabul. And Ambassador Katju was the best ambassador to be posted at that time in Afghanistan. And I know that after that...
I can see Ambassador Katju also blushing there. Ambassador, but just fast forwarding now to the situation now. How do you read the latest developments, Ambassador Katju?
No, but let me just say one sentence. Torek has been very kind, but I was nothing but Delhi's instrument, and all that I was doing was carrying out a policy set by my superiors in Delhi. So I can't claim any credit for anything that was done on behalf of India in Afghanistan at a time which I think was crucial. But you're right, if we fast forward developments, I must begin with a confession. In 2002 March, when I reached Afghanistan, if someone had asked me then, 18 years on, in 2020, do you think, in a manner of speaking, the clock would be turned back? I would have been very skeptical. Because the scene then was full of optimism. There were troubles on the horizon, but basically it was a scene which was full of hope. And Torek, of course, was there. He did an enormous job on behalf of his people. Today, in a manner of speaking, the clock has turned back. Because, quite candidly, the Islamic Republic, on account of a variety of factors, and we can discuss those if you want, has simply not been able to stabilize itself. These factors are both internal but more external. And because it hasn't been able to stabilize itself, you have come to a situation when, again, the prospects of an interim situation, interim government, have become very live. Because after all, in all the fine language which will be there in the document which has been agreed to in Doha between the two negotiating teams, and what is remarkable is that here is a government sort of team put together by the government, even if it is not speaking a government team, and on the other side is a rebel team, the Taliban, insurgents. And I'm putting it politely, insurgents.
Yeah.
And they're negotiating on a basis of equality. So whichever interim arrangement which is formed, will have all kinds of questions. Something must have been agreed. We are not privy to that. There is the question of who would head it, how will power be distributed, who will man it. So all those issues, I must confess, fill me with some trepidation. As of now, I only hope that this would succeed, because the procedural aspects which have been agreed to are important. You've got to decide on the size of the table, on whose flag will be there, and what will be the nomenclature used. All that is important in any negotiating process. But more important are the substantive issues relating to the kind of politics which would come about for taking Afghanistan forward. And that too will be very contested. So,
very contested. Dr. Farhadi, do you agree with that? That it seems that ultimately there will be a demand of an interim kind of a government setup?
Yes, Ambassador Katju has a fine eye for observing what's going on here. The reason for the interim setup is that one side of the conflict will not accept to work under the other. Neither President Ashraf Ghani would accept to work under a Taliban government, and neither the Taliban would accept to work under President Ashraf Ghani. And that's the reason why this peace has taken so long. In fact, it goes back to 2010. The first Loya Jirga that President Karzai convened for peace council was then. But you see, perhaps President Karzai was ready for this, but the international community was not ready. Perhaps the Americans were not ready in Washington to make peace with an enemy. Even if President Karzai had wanted to make some sort of... President Karzai felt early on that there was a mistake made in Bonn by completely excluding the Taliban, because then the Taliban could become an instrument for Pakistan. And we can say this now because Pakistan has said it as well, that they were the ones collecting the few leaders and giving them respite and then logistical support and encouragement to start again. Had they been given something in Bonn while they had lost, and this is what we learned from history, is that in a war, the one who loses also needs to come as part of the solution at the end. Nobody wins all of the war 100%. They might win cosmetically, but the one who loses never disappears. So this is what happened here. And in 2010, President Karzai, before 2010, President Karzai probably, and I must clarify for our viewers that I left Afghanistan at the end of 2002 for an international career at the World Bank and United Nations. So I wasn't there, but I was following Afghanistan every day, of course. I'm an Afghan. Who can forget Afghanistan and its people and its suffering? So this is why I have kept in touch, and now that I'm retired, I have decided to speak what I know about my country. But President Karzai understood early on that the Taliban needed to be participant in the power structure, but the Americans were not. It took Donald Trump to be president to break the taboo and say, find a solution. We have to make peace. And I don't care who the Taliban are and how many people they have killed. We have to make peace with them. And probably Donald Trump was looking also for the show side of it. The same way he went to North Korea and walked into North Korea, he would have hoped in September of 2019 to bring the Taliban at Camp David and sign something with them. And there also, you can see that the destiny of countries is a lot in the hands of personalities. In this case, Donald Trump. In this case, John Bolton canceling the whole event.
Yeah.
The rivalry between John Bolton and Ambassador Khailzad, because it's Khailzad who had prepared this deal to bring the Taliban to Camp David with Ashraf Ghani in September 2019. But he hadn't shown his deal to Bolton, who was the national security advisor in the United States. And this created all this mistrust, and Bolton was able to break the deal. So that signature that could have happened between Ashraf Ghani and the Taliban in September 2019, more than a year ago, never happened. And Donald Trump didn't get the showpiece that he wanted.
Since Dr. Farhadi is talking about personalities, Ambassador, are you surprised that this agreement has been reached at this stage? Because it seemed that both sides were stalling, waiting for January 20th. And two, if you're talking about personalities and what we've seen from history with the President-elect Biden, what do you expect from the US?
I too had thought initially that both sides would want the dust to settle down, a new administration to come in before the negotiations gathered steam. But I think what has happened is that the incoming administration, Biden's, would perhaps want all this mess to be sorted out before he takes office. So he would not be terribly diffident in this arrangement being arrived at and being pursued over these next weeks, so that when he assumes office, there'll be some clarity on the ground.
Sure, he won't be different, as you're saying, but why is it happening? He doesn't have any power currently to influence events.
Look, he too is in favor of an American withdrawal. Yeah. I think there is a consensus in the American system that this war has gone on for too long, and it must end. It is America's longest war, and it must end. So he is part of that consensus. The question then is of modalities. The war must end not with an American victory, because the Americans have lost strategically, quite clearly, but with a strategic loss, the decks must be cleared. There is a mess; it must be cleared, and it's better that this mess is cleared by the outgoing administration than left in his lap. That's the second aspect. And the third is that I'm sure that in all this, by now, there would have been discussions behind the scenes on basic aspects of the situation between the Trump people, Khailzad and others, and the gentlemen who would come in. And after all, they've been all named. And they are not novices in this game. Yeah. The people who are there are people who know. So there is a continuum in the establishment. So given all that, I'm not what I had thought earlier, quite clearly, has been overtaken by this particular aspect. And we'll now have to see whether over the next few weeks there is a purposeful discussion between the negotiating team. And one of the critical areas will be on what kind of an arrangement will there be in Kabul.
Which both of you have talked about. Dr. Farhadi, what's propelling the Taliban to agree, even at this minute level, for procedural agreement to start the actual substantive talks? Why are they doing this?
Well, Taliban got what they wanted.
Yeah, so I mean, they could continue. They could, violence is anyway continuing. If they're looking for a military victory, they could push it further. Why are they willing to have these negotiations?
For the cosmetics as well. Yes, Taliban got their leaders released, temporary release of their ban from the Security Council, They got prestige. Pakistan has said openly that they have brought the Taliban around the table, because there is the Haqqani Taliban, there is the Taliban, we know it, there is the Taliban from Helmand, which are a little different, more proximity with Iran. There is the Taliban from the north. And the Pakistanis are saying, look, guys, we have brought all these people in a civilized table. We have given them all black and white clothing. They seem to think the same. They are more united than the crowd in Kabul. Because in Kabul, on this Republic side, it's chaos. They haven't been able to put together the National Reconciliation Council. But the Taliban are together. They have the spokesman, they have the legitimacy, the diplomatic office, their presence, the uniform, and they have gotten a lot of what they have wanted. And on the side, they are continuing the war and violence. So they have already gotten a lot. I think Pakistan had a role to bring them to the table, because with Trump, Pakistan wanted this to succeed and bring the Taliban in a power-sharing formula with Ghani. But Ghani had to accept to come down from the presidency, basically, and find somebody else, perhaps a Talib, to be sort of a spiritual leader, and a government would work, but it will be overwhelmingly Taliban. That didn't happen. And now Khailzad is probably leaving, Trump is leaving, but as ambassador said, I agree, I will give you a metaphor, an image, but for people who have been in Kabul, we have mountains around the city, and we have homes on top of the mountains, and children are in charge of taking the bags of water, take it up the mountain. What Khailzad has done, and he has taken the bag of water and take it up to the mountain. And Biden is saying, let him take it to as high as he can.
Yeah, he hasn't been able to force anybody to drink it as yet.
Exactly. Then at least they will deliver most of the water at the top of the mountain. Then it will be for the Biden administration to decide how to do that. Yes, the Democrats will be more amenable to a softer exit for Ashraf Ghani, more livable type of exit, while the Pompeo and Trump administration were saying that really our purpose now is to get out and take the burden of Afghanistan off of our shoulders, Secretary Pompeo was saying. America will be, the new America will be a little more diplomatic in what they say, but President-elect Biden is the person who had said, look, I mean, with these complicated countries, even if they divide in several parts, we're not going to stand against that eventuality. So it is still very dangerous for Afghanistan under the Biden administration. And really, if the Afghan leaders can't agree, historically, in 10 or 20 years, we will read again and we will blame them, but it'll be too late.
Too late. Ambassador Katju, on Pakistan's role, I mean, how do you see it going forward? Biden has experience in the Afghan region, especially with Pakistan. He was there as the Senate, head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, then as vice president. He was in the Situation Room when Osama bin Laden was killed. How do you see the Biden administration dealing with Pakistan, especially if the drawdown continues? By April, you don't have, except for counterterrorism troops, any American troops in Afghanistan?
Look, let's start with basics. I think the Americans can't afford a post-1989 situation anymore. They can't afford Afghanistan going into chaos. They couldn't afford that in Iraq, and they certainly won't be able to afford it here. Otherwise, the question that the American administration and both parties will have to answer is, what was all this for? These 19 years, close to $1 trillion in expenditure, the loss of 2,500 American lives and other lives of other allied soldiers. So what was all this for? Hence, I would rationally, I think the Biden people would like all this to be kept together. And that is why, while conceptually I can subscribe to what Torek has said, and he's been very, very circumspect, but I think what he was, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, that what he was hinting at was a reversion to the 1990 situation. If that means break up, and we know what happened in 1990 once Najibullah fell, we know exactly the situation which arose. Now, no one in the international community would like that too. The region wouldn't like it. Certainly, I don't think anyone in Delhi would like it. I'm not part of the government. I have nothing to do with them. But that is my anticipation, that no one here too would like chaos in Afghanistan. So, the question is, how will all this be put together? And that is where the Pakistanis come in. The Pakistani bottom line was, as what Tariq said, and quite clearly that can't be achieved. Because no one in the international community is still easy with the Taliban coming and with the danger of a re-establishment of a kind of system which the Taliban carried out in the 1990s. So therefore, a power sharing agreement, an arrangement. Now, it's fine to talk in conceptual terms that there will be a power sharing arrangement. But a power sharing arrangement is perhaps the most difficult thing to put together in a conflict situation like there is in Afghanistan. And it requires flexibility on all sides. And I think on Kabul, there will be elements of flexibility, but there is deep division, as Torek has rightly said, in Kabul. On the Taliban side, I suspect there is greater cohesion, but yet there are divisions. And behind all that are Pakistani interests. And let us not forget that Pakistani interests and the Taliban's interests don't coincide on all points. There are points of convergence, but there are also points of great divergence between the two. So we'll have to really see how all this plays out. But the first question, of course, would be, if I may come just this last point, the first question would be, what will be the nature of the arrangement? It is not as if power sharing means that President Ghani will remain the president. That is a possibility, but I think it's unlikely that President Ghani remains the president. And then there are certain ministries that are given to the Taliban, and they man those ministries, and they sort of come into this arrangement. That is one scenario, but it's highly unlikely. So if that is ruled out, then how will power be distributed? What will be the name, the purpose and ambit of an interim administration's role? All that needs to be worked out. I mean, and this first step on procedure, etc., is good. And if you see Khailzad's tweets, he's also mentioned I'm not using his exact words, but he's implying that there will be some kind of a political arrangement. And we just have to wait and watch how that emerges, unless something has already been cooked. Yes, my last point. My last point is that the Pakistanis too know that at the end of the day, on this, the Biden people may be more softer, more suave, less showing less of an iron fist, more of the glove. But when push comes to shove, they will also tell the Pakistanis that beyond the point, you can't play games, you've got to deliver.
Dr. Farhadi, do you see that coming? I mean, pressure on GHQ in Rawalpindi, and talking about why one of the reasons possibly why the Taliban is moving forward step by step, because it's not only power. They need money when they kind of come into power in whatever manner that is. And we just saw the donor conference where some suggest that there's been a 20% reduction overall to about 13 billion in pledges. Is that one of the reasons possibly that the Taliban is looking forward?
So the GHQ and the Pakistani government is used to American pressure from the days of Armitage after September 11, where Armitage had gone to Islamabad and say we're going to bomb Pakistan, and the Pakistanis had said that Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan. Why are you bombing us? Remember, the Pakistanis are masters at managing pressure from the United States and getting good advantage for themselves. We have to be fair. Now, in this case, the Pakistanis already have the Biden administration chess set ready. They have invited Gulbuddin Hekmatyar to Islamabad. They have invited Abdullah to Islamabad. I think they will be open, or Mr. Mohakkik has had some good relations with them as well. At this point, the Pakistanis can deliver a Taliban Afghan government without Mr. Ghani and with all these other people. And that would be acceptable to most, because now, since 3 or 4 days, I was quoted in a New York Times article, which really displeased the palace, the presidential palace,
Yes.
where the real block to the peace is President Ghani, because if he accepts that the name of the republic is no longer in the agreement, then he has worked himself out of the next chess game. And but Pakistan has already prepared the Biden chess game, which is without Mr. Ghani, with Mr. Hekmatyar, with perhaps Mr. Rabbani, who heads the Jamiat, with Mr. Abdullah, with Mr. Mohakkik, and a few Taliban, and an interim administration with a couple of technocrats or bureaucrats. They gave assurance to the Europeans that we are still managing your money better than Mr. Ghani, because the level of corruption went so high under Mr. Ghani that today the World Bank, who liked Mr. Ghani, has written a letter to him saying, look, what you're doing
is not giving us enough data.
Yes, and also he's moving the public-private partnerships from the Ministry of Finance, which is under the purview of the Parliament, to his own office.
I was saying, you want to take up from where Dr. Farhadi was talking about Pakistan already having prepared the chessboard for the next US administration?
I think there will be some kind of an arrangement. The Pakistanis' role in this, in making this happen, is to get the Taliban to show flexibility. Now, I'm not quite sure whether it is within their capacity to deliver on what will be the nature of the participation of Kabul in this arrangement. I don't think that they have the kind of equity in Kabul which they will, which is required to deliver that. That will have to be worked out by the Americans, not Pakistan. So, and overall, this would be an arrangement which would be acceptable to the Americans and to the allies, who are donors, who are principal donors. We too are a major donor.
Yep.
But I don't think we are involved in this process. India, by we, I mean India is involved in this process to that extent. So I think Pakistan's role is, as far as the Americans are concerned, is Taliban. Kabul is their baby and they'll have to deliver. And it is there that the question will arise, who in Kabul would lead the team? And then the second question would be, who would be acceptable as a leader to both the Taliban and to the Kabul people? And there I find, I'm sure there are some names which we are all hearing of, but I don't know who it will be. So that is a question mark at the moment, at least in my mind, it's a question mark. And now, can there be Ghani who can lead that team? I think he would like to. But as Torek says, that if in the negotiation, and that is what I read in one of the papers today, that if in the negotiations, as part of the procedures, the Kabul has decided to abandon the use of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in return for the Taliban not insisting on Islamic Emirate, then that is an indication of the kind of power equation that is now emerging in Afghanistan.
Sure. That power equation, Dr. Farhadi, I'll go back to the ambassador because he's made this point repeatedly, even on our channel and others. India's engagement, how do you see that? I mean, the official position has been that for the first time when the Taliban was in the room, the foreign minister made a video statement in Doha when the agreement was being reached. But how do you see or want or see the capability of India's role in the future of Afghanistan?
Let me come to this very sensitive question. But if I may also give one more point of context here. Mm-hmm. It's not only the Americans, it's now the Europeans too that are part of the pressure system that got Dr. Ghani to accept this document yesterday. What's happening with the Europeans is that they have about 6,000 forces in Afghanistan under the hat of NATO.
Yeah.
But as the US is accelerating its exit to 2,500 soldiers, the protective cover for these 6,000 NATO soldiers is evaporating. The German foreign minister, who's a lady, has said, look, if this continues, we would have to reduce our presence because we are not protected in Afghanistan. Protection, logistics, air cover, delivery of fuel, etc. It's really the big elephant was America. But if America is leaving, the NATO forces cannot stay too long, and that's why yesterday the NATO Secretary General said we have to look at this in 3 months. Look, we would like to leave, but we don't want chaos. Why? What has changed in the world in the last 10 years is the Syria crisis, which sent hundreds of thousands of migrants to Europe. And in 2015 and 2016, 380,000 Afghans made it to Europe.
Yep.
This was the first taste of if there is chaos in Afghanistan. The geography that has to pay first is Europe. America is far. America can decide to leave and say, okay, this war was finished, and then a couple of headlines in American papers saying, okay, it's finished. But Europe will be left with the wave of refugees coming out of Afghanistan towards Iran and making it in the worst conditions. We have seen the pictures of people drowning and families drowning, and still now Afghans in Lesbos in Greece.
Even being shot at.
Yes, but when people see no hope in their own country, when they see that minorities are not respected.
Saying that fear of another influx a la Syria from Afghanistan would be driving the EU or Europe.
EU's biggest fear.
Yeah,
They don't say it, but in fact, this is their biggest fear, the Europeans.
What about India's biggest fear, Dr. Farhadi?
I'm sorry?
What about India's biggest fear? The Taliban are going back to 1992 with Pakistan having complete control over Afghanistan through the Taliban. What about that?
I think there also, if a political arrangement can be worked out so that India also can talk to the Americans to bring a Taliban administration that will be pretty independent and will comprise other elements, technocrats, others, to transform Afghanistan in a zone of neutrality, although it's very difficult now, rather than a zone that will be answerable to Islamabad. That's all India wants, actually, at this point. Because the rest of
I can see the ambassador shaking his head there, because he does think the Taliban can act independently of GHQ, right? I mean, make your point, Ambassador.
Please, Ambassador.
Look, I had mentioned that there are points of convergence between the Taliban and Pindi, and there are points of divergence. I'm mindful of the fact that in the 1990s, the Taliban were not the legitimate government of Afghanistan. The international community didn't accept, except for 3 countries, Pakistan, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. No one else recognized the Taliban. As Torek knows full well, the UN seat was held by President Rabbani. His distinguished father was perhaps Afghanistan's greatest diplomat in the last century. And he played a notable role in all this. So the point which I'm making is that while naturally Delhi should be concerned about the nexus between the Taliban and Pindi, yet the assumption should not be that they will be absolute puppets, that they'll have no independent role at all. That is one. Second, if we are looking at a doomsday scenario, which is the reversion back to civil war, again Afghanistan breaking up into fiefdoms, and that is what Torek was hinting, then quite clearly it will be a colossal failure on the part of Europe and the United States and the region to allow that to happen. It is in no one's interest. Hence, there is much at stake. It's going to be an enormously difficult process. But in their movement away, leaving just 2,500 troops behind, I do not think that Biden or Trump during these last weeks can afford to contemplate such a situation. And I agree with Torek that for Europe, this is a nightmare. Apart from people's movements, what about the movement of the explosion which we can expect in such a situation of narcotics? And Europe is the principal recipient of those Afghan narcotics. So I do think that wiser counsel will prevail, and that everyone will get together to ensure that an arrangement is arrived at. Won't be easy, but an arrangement is arrived at, and shepherd a process for discussions between the various parties in Afghanistan to arrive at common ground on Afghanistan's political future and constitutional future. Now that will be supremely difficult, but it can be done. And frankly, I do think that the Afghan elites have to play a role here. It's now what, close to 5 decades that the country has been in turmoil.
Master Katju, difficult as you're saying, but there is still a way. I think, Dr. Farhadi, I think there is another Pashto saying which says that the road to the mountain may be very long, but it is still possible to reach there. Ambassador Katju and Dr. Farhadi, I thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights. I'm sure we'll be talking about this subject in the weeks, months, and hopefully not the years to come. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with the Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Amitabh, and thank you for getting Torek on the program. It's been wonderful. And thank you.
It's been our pleasure. And you can follow our kind of journalism and support it on our website. Do also follow our social media handles, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to get all our latest posts. You've been watching Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.